Welcome to the Sales Lead Dog Podcast, hosted by CRM technology and sales process expert Christopher Smith, talking with sales leaders that have separated themselves from the rest of the pack. Listen to find out how the best of the best achieve success with their team and CRM technology. And remember, unless you are the lead dog, the view never changes.
Welcome to Sales Lead Dog. Very excited for today's episode. Joining me today, I have Karen Pugliese of C&D Technologies. Karen, welcome to Sales Lead Dog.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm excited to be here.
It's a wonderful day. Tell me a bit about C&D Technologies, Karen.
Yeah, C&D Technologies has been around for over a century. We're an energy solutions manufacturer. We go ahead and manufacture a variety of different battery solutions globally. We're a market leader, really focused on honing in on some very specific verticals. So energy infrastructure, so the utility market, nuclear market, data center, and then what you would consider to be telecom. So that's the cable operators and service providers.
Yeah, I have a background in telecom, and I remember very
Excellent.
early in my 20s going into the call centers, or I think not the call centers, they're I forget what they call them, but
Oh,
they're
the
the big block
COs, like
buildings,
the central
the central
offices.
offices. Yes, thank
Yeah.
you. And they'd have these massive batteries and they were chemical based and just row after row. I imagine the technology has advanced quite a bit since then.
It has, but you'd be surprised to see the number of customers that still have those flooded batteries that you referenced. I
Yeah.
mean, the chemistries have obviously changed. Lead acid is probably the most dominant today in the market, and certainly C&D has had a lot of focus in terms of maximizing their pure lead VRLA batteries, and then obviously you've got other chemistries that are
Yeah.
constantly in play.
Yeah, that's such a huge, I mean, with where everything is going around energy, batteries, I don't think have ever been more important. And that importance is just going to grow.
100%. It's interesting because when you think about it, historically, no one was really concerned the um the standards that you would think about in a building, right? So you
Right.
have electricity, you've got, plumbing, you've got water. Like no one was really concerned about the availability of those. And yet today you look at something crazy, just like what you're looking at when you go onto ChatGPT and you query something. I mean, that's 10 times more compute power requirements
Yeah.
for that search versus using Google. And so when you think about that,
Yeah.
that 10 times exponential increase in terms of compute and energy is incredible. And so, now you've got countries that are putting moratoriums on data centers because they just don't have enough energy just to
Yeah.
maintain the people in their homes, let alone, adding EV charging, data centers, AI, additional compute. So I think it's a really interesting time in the energy services space.
It really is. It's because it's wherever you have power generation, you also have to have power backup. You have to have storage.
Exactly. Yeah,
That it's not, you can't count on that power source being 100% all the time. That's just not reality.
agreed. And no one has the patience that they used to. I think that one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that everybody became very focused on availability and uptime. And so now, any glitch that you have in your life is almost deemed unacceptable.
Oh yeah.
And so that whole kind of like that kind of circle of death that you see is something's buffering. Like it's almost unheard of today, except for maybe when that UFC fight was on
Oh yeah.
Netflix and they had problems, but
Yeah.
that had everything to do with latency
Yeah.
and fiber backbone and all of that wonderful stuff, and nothing really to do with batteries and
Right.
backup.
Right. So Karen, you've had an incredible career. When you look back over your career, what are the three things, if you could boil it down to three things, what are those three things that have really driven and led to your success?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is kind of like how my career got started. I started off at GE, great organization. Can't say enough wonderful things. This was back in the days of Jack Welch, so I'm going to age myself a little bit when I say that. Um, but I had a great mentor. And I think for me, that was really a critical turning point, was that I had a great mentor who kind of said, like, the world's your oyster. Here's all the things that you can do. And so that was kind of the first thing. I think the second thing was really around understanding that, you know, sales is a little bit of art, it's a little bit of science, but it is truly a profession. And I think that sometimes salespeople get a little bit of a bad rap
Yeah.
as a result of that. But I think that understanding that it is a profession and there is the opportunity to hone your skills over the course of time, I think was the second thing. And the third one was really the network that I was able to build. I don't think I would have been able to grow my career, go from, the last role that I had at GE was in healthcare. And now I'm working for an energy storage solutions company. Like, those two things don't often go together. And then there was a bunch of security stuff and connectivity in between. So I think the ability to kind of grow my network over the course of my career has also been very critical in terms of the success that I've had.
That's a common thread that I've seen with a lot of very successful people, is that they have a tremendous network that they can rely on, that they can reach out to when they need to.
Yeah, and it does need to be, one of the things that I remind people when they talk about, how do I build my network, is like, well, it's really a symbiotic relationship, because you can't just connect with someone. They're gonna want to come back to you and ask for something
Yeah.
at some point in time during that engagement, over the course of years, obviously. And so you kind of have to give as much as you get. And I
Yeah.
think that that's like a really important aspect to remember, is that it's not just reaching out and trying to, gather them up like coins or chips. It's
Yeah.
really like you're constantly trading back and forth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I believe it. I believe it. Yeah. And it's got to be a two-way street too. It's not just, hey, I'm going to take from you all the time, because your network is going to wither and die. That's your
Exactly.
perspective. Yeah. Um, so you're VP of Global Sales. When you started your career, is that something you envisioned? This is where I'm going to be at this
Yeah,
point in my career?
no, not at all. I have a degree in political science and economics. And I really thought that I would end up probably in, I'm going to say, some kind of policy related government role. That was kind of where I thought I was going to be. It kind of wasn't even in the cards for me. And then I started working at GE, and just through the mentor relationship that I had, it just kind of, I'm going to say, it just kind of happened. But I ended up in a sales role, and it was really my mentor at the time that said, listen, the best salespeople understand how a business works. And so I think you should leave your sales role that I was very happy with, very comfortable with,
Yeah.
and go and take advantage of the Six Sigma initiatives that were
Oh, yeah.
happening in GE. And I was like, that at the time, I felt like it was a little bit of a punishment, I have to say. Um, and it was one of those things within that GE environment that kind of, when you got tapped on the shoulder to do something like that, it was career limiting to say no. And so I said yes, obviously. And I think for me, that was when all the pieces kind of started coming together.
Mm.
When I left GE and I was working at Stanley, the leader at Stanley, who was an ex-GE person, was like, they did a great job in terms of making you a great sales leader and a great business leader. And I was like, what are you talking about? I just spent like a whole bunch of time doing Six Sigma stuff. And then I did a little bit of I'll say the first kind of foray into e-commerce in terms of getting the accessories and supplies, the healthcare accessories and supplies business online, which
Right.
really wasn't online. It was just a whole bunch of pictures on a website and then you put them in your cart and it spewed out an email at the call center. So I really didn't see myself as being in a sales leadership role, nor did I see that I had acquired the skills to be able to do it. And it wasn't until I went to Stanley that they kind of turned around and they said, like, you tick all the boxes. And I was like, all the boxes for what? I was a little bit surprised.
Right, right.
So,
Well, you're
because
so
it,
in the middle of it, so in the thick of it. Oftentimes we lose that perspective of those skills that we're actually developing, right?
yeah, 100%, Chris. And I think the other thing is that when you're, they had a very defined approach where like every 2 to 3 years your role changed. So when I was there for just a bit over 10 years, and so that's a lot of different roles with a
Yeah.
lot of different focuses. And when you're in it, you don't really realize the things that you're learning and that you're gaining and that you're understanding.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily see how all those pieces kind of fit together until the puzzle's kind of complete. I just needed somebody to show me the completed puzzle for me to get my head around it.
Oh yeah. One of the things that, again, I think we're similar age, and although I never had the opportunity to work at GE, you you had to have your head in the sand to not understand what was going on at GE in the Jack Welch era.
Yes,
And I think there's a very common theme there of constant learning and evolution.
constant.
Can you talk about that and what role that's
Yeah.
played with the rest of your career?
I think the first part of it is that, I think inherently I'm a constant learner. Like I'm an avid reader. I tend to sometimes go down rabbit holes, to try and understand something. So I think that for me, it was great alignment at GE because it was a culture of learning. There are people that I still am engaged with today who like started their career in light bulbs and ended up in like jet engines. Like it's almost unfathomable when you think of somebody's career. And so if you weren't really great at learning, if you weren't really great at kind of embracing that, you really struggled kind of within that culture. Um, so for me, I think one, the learning piece has always been important. I probably could have been a student, like I could have been a professional student,
Right.
if I could have survived on that. Um, so when I look at going from one industry to another, or from one manufacturer, one tech company to another, for me it's like it's exciting to try and understand how does the new stuff fit into all the old stuff that I understand, and that I've kind of gotten my head around over the course of time. And so I think it allows you to see things from some different perspectives, and it really forces you to understand the business and not just the product or the solution. And I think that's the exciting part for me in most organizations.
Yeah. And that's one thing I remember about Jack Welch too, is that a great leader can lead any business.
Hmm.
But I think that's because you have to be able to learn. You have to be able
Yes.
to come in and know how to ask the right questions and to be able to listen, right?
Agreed. And it's interesting. When I first kind of started thinking about it, once I left GE, I was like, I don't do I have any transferable skills? Like I worked in capital, I worked in corporate, I worked in healthcare, I worked in their IT business. It's like all of these things kind of felt very disparate, but the reality is that every business that you go into is trying to figure out how to optimize their processes. They're trying to figure out how to grow their businesses. They're trying to uncover, new verticals or new applications or new customers, or looking at expanding into new geographies. All of those things are the same, regardless of what your solution is. And so, I think those skills become very transferable. And I have to say, I'm always a little disappointed when I speak to someone and they say, oh, I applied for this role and they said, oh, you needed to have financial services background, or you needed to have, experience in, um, in, some kind of SaaS solution. And it's like, that's really unfortunate because once you peg people into those roles, like that whole concept of diversity, like diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of knowledge kind of gets lost if all you're doing is creating a scenario where you've just got people kind of moving themselves around the same industry.
Yeah.
And so I'm always a little bit disappointed in that. I think that it doesn't create that growth and learning excitement when you kind of limit that opportunity.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. In fact, I was going to ask you a question. I was going to tee you up with a question on that, and you jumped ahead and answered it because I think that's really important. It drives me crazy when I talk to people like that. It's like, yeah, it helps to understand that industry, but there's a flip side to that, to where you become myopic and everyone, you have groupthink because everyone's doing it and thinking about it the same way. It's very helpful for someone to come in with that is naive, that maybe doesn't, that's going to ask questions that are going to reframe the conversation.
100%. 100%. And I think if you look at organizations that have made evolutionary or revolutionary change, like it's often because they had somebody come in who just saw the business or saw the market from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
And in most cases, they didn't come from the competitor,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like they
Yeah.
came from something completely different. And I think that's where the creativity often comes from versus kind of what I call, copy, rinse, repeat
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
as kind of being an approach.
Yeah, I remember reading about when Ford, I think it was Ford Motor Company, brought in the former CEO of Boeing to take over, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, he doesn't know anything about the car industry. What in the world is he going to be able to bring?"
Mm-hmm.
He brought a whole new perspective on how to do things and really shook it up. And a lot of times, that's what you need. You need a leader that's willing to shake the tree and ask why or why
Agreed.
not.
Yeah, and every business goes through, some kind of evolutionary cycle, right?
Right.
Some are more mature than others. And, why would you want to try and start from scratch, right? Like
Right.
I often think about it, like I look at an organization that's, looking at leveraging a channel strategy. Like, why would you try and build that in-house? Why wouldn't you go to another industry that has a really mature channel strategy
Right.
that's kind of tripped over itself, figured out what works, figured
Right.
out what doesn't work, and bring those lessons learned, and then reframe the channel strategy kind of within your business
Yeah.
or within your industry. I mean, I just kind of look at that as a bit of a no-brainer versus trying
Yeah.
to figure it out from scratch.
Yeah.
And then going through all of those pain points, which means you end up going slower than you need to in
Oh,
order to
yeah.
be
And
successful.
you're falling on your face a heck of a lot more than you need to.
Yeah, exactly. That's why YouTube videos are so popular,
Oh, yeah.
right? Instead
Yeah.
of trying to figure out how to do it, on your own, try and
Yeah.
put the bookcase together or figure out how to build a fire pit. You go on YouTube and have somebody show you. So we
Yeah.
do it in our personal lives, and yet we're a little bit less embracing of it from a professional perspective.
Yeah. What was your biggest challenge for you in your evolution as a leader?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm gonna say my biggest challenge was actually leaving GE.
Really?
And yeah, and I say that because it was my first, I'm going to call it my first real job, after university. I spent 10 plus years there. It's kind of like that's where my friends were, that I felt comfortable in that culture. I knew how to get things done. I knew what worked, what didn't work. I understood a lot around the expectations, even if it was different businesses and different roles. I knew at a very high level what the expectations were and um, how the organization ran itself.
Right.
And after 10 years, I could manage my way through it. I don't want to say with my eyes closed, but I could manage my way through it. When I got to Stanley, it was, my husband joked that, I was leaving a utopia that didn't exist anywhere else. And there was nothing wrong with Stanley. Stanley was a great organization, don't get me wrong, but it just operated completely differently.
Yeah.
And that, that for me, I think at that point, I think I was the youngest VP that they'd ever had. I was the youngest female VP that they had in their business. Um, I had no security background. So I was coming in like completely green. All of my previous kind of management roles had been P&L focused, but most of them were kind of in that startup realm,
Right.
within the GE world. And so I wasn't walking in, I'd never walked into a long-standing business
Mhm.
that already had, ingrained processes, ingrained people. And so for me, that was like, it was overwhelming. And I can remember, and just to add a little bit more flavor to it, I think they'd had like 12 leaders in like 14 years or something like
Oh,
that.
no
And
kidding.
so it was just like it was I'm gonna say it was good that I was young and naive and I just didn't
Yeah.
know any better, because
Yeah.
because walking into it, I really don't think that I really understand what I was getting into, but it was probably the biggest challenge, um, because I had to completely change my thinking and how I saw, the business. I couldn't frame it within a GE world, right? Like it
Right.
just didn't, the culture was completely different.
How did you cross that bridge and reframing your thinking? Because that's not an easy task. That's a huge
No.
task.
Yeah, I was really lucky that there were a bunch of ex-GE people who were
Mhm.
actually at Stanley.
Right.
And and very quickly I figured out that I needed some help.
Right.
And I reached out to them and basically said like, okay, like I'm struggling a little bit going from like GE mindset to Stanley mindset. And there were two gentlemen and they were both fantastic. They were like, oh yeah, the first 4 months are horrific. They did two things which was fantastic. One was that they validated that what I was
Yeah.
going through was normal and acceptable and
Yeah.
expected. And
Yeah.
expected, I think, was the other thing. And then the second thing was they were like, be careful that like don't hold on too tightly to the GE stuff, but don't get sucked in too much to the Stanley stuff either. Like
Right.
try and find some footing that's in the middle.
Yeah.
That's why we hired you.
Right.
And so it took me a little bit of time, but I would have to say that those two gentlemen were just, were pretty fantastic. And
Yeah.
that's kind of where I started. I'm going to say I started to learn that I needed to be authentic,
Yeah.
around challenges and around, you know, trying to find the right way to fit in.
Yeah.
And I think I was authentic when I was at GE. It's just that I was authentic. Like GE was my authentic self, like that
Yeah.
culture was my authentic self.
Yeah.
And then when you go into a culture that's not like that, then
Yeah.
like your first reaction is like, I'm going to put on my armor
Right.
because I need to protect myself. And so yeah, they saved me. I'm going to say they
Yeah.
saved me in those first 4 months.
But I think you took a huge first step in terms of making yourself vulnerable. I think the best leaders are those that are willing to admit, I don't have all the answers. I need help. And
Yes.
the ones that are pretending that they know everything and don't need any help, those are the ones that are the worst. Was that a difficult thing for you to do to make yourself vulnerable, or was that
Yeah.
fairly easy for you?
So I'm gonna say, so here's what I would say, Chris. If those two gentlemen hadn't been from GE, I
Mhm.
don't know how it would have gone, because I think the fact that um we had people in common, that's the first thing, right? They knew people that I knew people that they knew. We'd been Both of them had been in healthcare at some point in their careers. And so, we had that in common. I think if they had not been, if they had not had that GE background, I don't know if I would have been as vulnerable,
Right.
as authentic with them. So I think that the fact that they had the same background as me, kind of allowed me or made me feel more comfortable doing it. I have to say that for most of my career, probably up until very recently, I probably had more armor on
Mhm.
than vulnerability. And I think part of that is because I was a woman in some very male dominated
Yeah.
industries. And so you tend to like get up every morning, put your armor on, and then go out into the world. Um, so it's it's probably only in the past kind of 5 years, I would say,
Yeah.
that I finally kind of said, and I'm transparent about the fact that I think the pandemic really had a lot to do with it. I had one instance where I had one of the individuals who worked for me kind of reach out to me and say, like, I don't think I can do this. And I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And they
Right.
said, I don't think I can do this working from home thing. I don't think I can do this like not going out, not traveling, not being out in front of people. Like I'm struggling, things are not going well. And I was like, yeah, I know. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, like we're all going through it. And they were like, oh, but like you make it sound like you're doing great. And I was like, what? Like in that moment, I was like, oh my goodness, what a disservice I've done to
Right.
my team.
Yeah.
I have led them to believe that like everything's going perfect for
Right.
me.
Right.
And I have set an unachievable bar slash standard for them. Like, and in that moment, I was like, it for me, like it was like a light bulb going off saying,
Yeah.
like, I can't, like, this is completely unacceptable.
Yeah.
Like, I can't do this. Meanwhile, I had two teenagers. Well, my daughter was a teenager, my son was in his, I guess, late. He was probably like 10, I guess, maybe if I
Yeah.
think about
Preteen.
it, like
Yeah.
preteen years, they were struggling.
Oh, yeah.
I had my parents were in their late 70s, early 80s at the time. I was worried about them. Um, my sister's a social worker. Her life was horrific. Like
Yeah.
it was like
No.
it was brutal. And I'm like, and here I am leading everybody to believe that,
Yeah.
I'm doing cartwheels and everything is, beautiful, lovely roses and everything's wonderful. And I'm making sourdough bread. None of
Yeah.
that was happening.
Yeah. I saw a video yesterday of Malcolm Gladwell talking about I don't know what triggered him to do this, but he started researching and identifying women that were the first board members of a corporation, reaching out to them and said, what was your experience like? And every one of them, horrible, horrible, horrible time. I was ignored, just horrible experience. And then he said, well, what happened when they had their second member of the board? Said, well, it was better, but it was still horrible. They didn't see a he didn't see a transition until they had a third female member of the team.
Hmm.
That's when they said everything shifted then because now we couldn't be ignored anymore.
Yeah.
We had a voice, a collective voice. What was your experience like working in as a woman leader in a male dominated place? I think it's important for everyone, especially men, to understand what
Yeah.
you went through.
So, so I'm gonna say, again, within the GE world, in 1994, GE had a women's network,
Yeah.
right? Head of legal counsel in Canada, woman. You had women leading businesses. So it was utopia. Like I
Yeah.
didn't realize it at the time, but it was utopia. When I left and I went to Stanley, it was a little bit of a rude awakening, and that awakening kind of continued for a good portion of my career,
Yeah.
where it was not uncommon for me to be the only woman in the room, and I'm gonna say that it drove some unhealthy behaviors, right? So one of the unhealthy behaviors was that I always felt like I needed to work 10 times harder just to be perceived to be like on the same level as my male counterparts. If there was, a tough assignment, I was the one who put my hand up, right? When I was working for a company, we had problems in one of our manufacturing plants in Juarez, and the leader of the business said, okay, I need somebody to go down there and try and figure out what was happening. I put my hand up.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, my husband was like, do you know anything about Juarez? And I'm like, I have no idea. And he's like, okay, like they had like 15 shootings yesterday. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm going. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
but none of the guys put their hands up. And so I put my hand up.
Yeah.
I think for me, I really intentionally tried to find allies kind of within every organization. There were times where it was like there was myself, there was the admin assistant or the executive assistant, and we were the only two women in the room.
Right.
And I knew that I knew that her being my best friend
Yeah.
wasn't going to solve my problem. And so I really intentionally tried to look for allies within the space. And I was lucky in a lot of cases, I was able to find those allies. I was able to find, those leaders or those mentors who, in a lot of cases were willing to provide me with some guidance, really lay out the political landscape. And I think that was the most important piece, was to understand the political landscape. Because sometimes you kind of think like, that person's speaking to me that way because I'm a woman. And in reality, they speak to everybody that way. It's
Right.
not specific to you. And so I just really, in most cases, was just like, I'm going to work. And this is the unhealthy part, right? I'm going to work 10 times harder. I'm going to volunteer for more stuff. I'm going to build a better network. I'm going to do more stuff than everybody else does. And I'll let my hard work just kind of speak for me.
Mhm.
The reality is that sometimes that's untenable over the course of time,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. You're digging
And
a
so
hole,
yeah, exactly.
and everyone around you is paying a price. It's very hard. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, so no, I appreciate you sharing that. Let's shift topics a little bit. CRM, do you love it or
Yes.
do you hate it?
I love it. And I'll tell you why I love it. Um, and I don't know if it's going to be for the reasons that other people love it, but I'm not a huge fan of it from the perspective of using it as a means to monitor, what everybody's doing. That's not why I love it. I love it because you can learn, right? And if you do a really good job of inputting information in, like, why did I win? Why did I lose? Who are the decision makers? Who was I up against? What could I have done differently? I mean, and I'm great. I'm still like paper, pen, book kind of person.
Yeah.
But I can't remember why we lost something 18 months ago.
Right.
And if I want to continuously learn, if I want to make sure that I'm not making the same mistakes over again, then I need to be able to go back and look at who were the decision makers, who was pro our solution, who was not a big fan of it. Why weren't they a big fan of it? What was their decision criteria at the time? What were they trying to achieve? And then you can look at, okay, 18 months later, when you're engaged with that customer again, has their decision criteria changed? And then you can start asking some really smart questions,
Yeah.
which is, you know, what do I need to do in order for you to choose me this time, given that you didn't choose me last time?
Yeah.
Right. And then they start saying things like, well, you need to be 20%, if everybody goes to price right away,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
need to be 20% cheaper. And so if you know that, like, there's no way that you're going to be 20% cheaper, then
Yeah.
you can lose fast,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
right? You can lose
Exactly.
fast.
Yeah. And not waste a whole bunch of time chasing a deal that where they're dangling this fish in front of you that you're never going to catch.
Exactly.
Focus on the ones that are. And I'm glad you said it that way because that's one of the, I've been implementing CRM for a long time now, and one of my struggles is getting people to understand and reframe their perspective around CRM that, yeah, while you can monitor people, that's not what it's best for. It's a wealth of information that should be driving learning, that should be driving strategy of, how do we get better? How do we improve? Hey, we consistently lose to this competitor. Why? What are they doing to win these deals that we're not doing? So next time we come up against them, what adjustments do we need to make so we can start winning? If you don't have that data in
Yes.
your CRM, you're never going to be able to make that adjustment.
100%. And I think the other piece is really also understanding the decision criteria that customers have.
Yeah.
And so, for an organization like C&D, where, we've got some focuses around some specific verticals, like you want to understand, I'll just use a utility as an example, like what is their decision criteria? And if you meet a customer where their decision criteria is different than everybody else in their space, then you can start having some really intelligent conversations,
Yes.
which is like, hey, listen, everybody else in your space, these are the four things that are important to them. I noticed that none of those four are on the criteria that you've outlined. Is there a reason why? Is it because you didn't know that those four were probably more important than maybe the four that you had? What led to your four being different? Are you trying to achieve something else? And then you really start learning about their business. And I always get a little disappointed, I'm going to say, from a seller's perspective that, usually the sellers are so focused on knowing everything about the products and solutions that they're selling that they forget to really learn about what's important to the customer, what's
Yes.
going on in their business.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so if you can have a tool, which is not a book that you're going to
Yeah.
throw out as soon as it's full,
Yeah.
um, if you have a tool that you can start inputting that information in
Yeah.
and start understanding, hey, when these are the four criteria, we always win.
Yes.
And then you can say, hey, listen, when this criteria comes up, we know that it's unlikely that we're going to be successful.
Yeah.
Then you can start making much smarter decisions around where to spend your time,
Yeah.
where to build effort, where to market and position yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that like those are the things that are so critical in terms of finding ways to be successful.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you want to have successful salespeople. Like the most difficult thing as a salesperson is to try and, sell pens to somebody who has no intention of writing,
Right.
right? Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it kind of hurts your soul
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
doing that all day, every day. And so the more information that you can gather in a CRM and really use it as a means to be able to focus your sellers on what is beneficial for
Yeah.
the customers and how we can solve problems. I mean, I think that I don't know any other tool that does that really well. I mean, people tried to do it in Excel spreadsheets for years and
No.
and that never worked. And it
No.
certainly doesn't work in a book.
No. No. If you had one thing to fix with CRM in general, what would that be?
Ooh, um, I think for me, it's really around having that differentiation between a seller identifying kind of what their key metrics or dashboards are. I
Mhm.
feel like in most CRMs, it's like here's your canned version. And
Yeah.
for some sellers, like and some sellers are on their opportunities. They could have 100 opportunities, like there's never one that goes past due. There's others that, I mean, they constantly have things that are past due. And
Yeah.
so, you know, for them, like the past due, the what's coming up, what is kind of in its final stage of the sales cycle. Like I'd love the opportunity for a seller to be able to say, like, here's the three dashboards that I want to look at every day
Yeah.
when I log in, and everything else I don't really want to see.
Yeah.
As a director, here's the three things that I want to look at.
Yeah.
As a business development person, they're going to want to look at things that are very different than somebody
Yeah.
who's selling in a channel.
Yeah.
So that for me, I just find that um, It's just not customizable enough for the user without doing a whole bunch of work.
Oh yeah, I just did a presentation at a big user group conference a couple months ago on data analytics, getting beyond the basics, and because that's where when we come in and engage with a client, a lot of times that's all they're doing is very basic dashboarding. That's really not driving decision making or driving action.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's the other thing that most dashboards I think lack is context.
Hmm.
It's just here's my number, but okay, it's a number. What is it telling me? If you don't have context, you can't make a decision. You don't know, are we going up, are we
Agreed.
going down? How's it compared to, same quarter last year, whatever that context needs to be. Um, I, to me, it's actually surprises me how much we see that this day and age, that people are still struggling in that area.
Yeah, and I think part of it is that I think two things drive it. I think the first thing is that most organizations think that they know their sales cycle better than the experts that built the CRM,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to hear that their business is not more complicated or more
Oh yeah.
different or any of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first mistake,
Yeah.
is that people tend to want to go in and change stuff.
Right.
So I think that's the first error. And then I think the second one is that the dashboard should show a trend or a behavior
Yeah.
that should result in action.
Yes. Otherwise, why do
And
you have it? If it's not
why,
driving
like,
action,
exactly.
what's it there
So
for?
the tendency more so is to say, and this is one of the things um, that I that we tend to make things more difficult than they have to be.
Yeah.
And so, I really try and find ways for my sales team and my leaders to try and boil things down to, like, what are the vital few criteria to
Yeah.
measure success?
Yeah.
And it's not about, it's not about big complicated formulas. It's like there's only three ways to grow your business. You can either find more, win more, or get more,
Yeah.
right? You can
Yeah.
find new customers, improve your win ratio, or go get more within the existing customers that you have.
Yeah.
And so the only things you can control are, how many opportunities are you finding?
Yeah.
How many times do you actually get to bid them and put a
Yeah.
price in? Because if you don't get to bid it, then your
Yeah.
opportunity to win is zero. And
Yeah.
then what is your close ratio? And then what is your average deal size? Because if your quote
Yeah.
is $1 million and
Yeah.
your average deal size is $100,000, and you only win 50% of the stuff
Yeah.
that you actually bid on, then you need a 2x funnel in order to be successful.
Yep.
That's not complicated. That's
Yeah.
like really easy math.
Yep.
Yet we have a tendency to try and look at the analytics piece and, look at 18-month rolling averages and, try and understand, well, this one only went through two stages and then we lost it.
Yep.
Like, that complexity, I think, is a lot of noise. And just because you can measure it, just because you can report on it, doesn't mean that it's actually beneficial to your business and to your
Right.
activities to be
Yeah.
looking at it all day, every
Yeah,
day.
that's the key thing. Anytime, when I gave my presentation, it's like if you have a number on there, you better have a clear definition of what is the purpose of this number. How are we going to use it? Like what
Hmm.
action is it driving? And if you don't have a clear understanding of that, go back to the drawing board. And also explain to it, like every business has maybe 3 to 5 numbers that if I look at those numbers every day, I know the health of my business. And so, what are those numbers for your business? And it was funny. One person raised his hand to him, like, "What are those numbers? Can you tell me those numbers for my business?" I'm like, no, you misunderstood. It's not the same 3 to 5 for every business. Every
They're
business
just
has its
your
three to
three to
five.
five.
It's your
Yeah.
numbers. You have to understand what that is. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. But
It's
yeah, it's like you have to know those numbers and you have
mhm.
to be measuring those numbers. And so if you have CRM set up the right way, it should be feeding those numbers.
Agreed. And I'll share the funniest thing a customer, it was a channel partner actually, once said to me, Chris, and we had built a portal for them that
Yeah.
fed into our CRM. And so we were going through this pilot phase, and so I asked him, like, so, what does you and your team think? We've done the training. You guys have been a part of the pilot for the past 6 weeks. And he said, he's like, everything's great. He's like, but I just want to say this one thing. Just because the field exists does not mean that you need to use it. And I was like, I was kind of taken aback. He's like, there's really only 3 pieces of information that you want to really know from me. He's like, but you've got 18 fields.
Yeah.
Get rid of the 15 that you're never going to look at. You're never going to use it for any kind of reporting. It's not going to give you any data. It's not going to tell you whether you're efficient, non-efficient, directionally correct, not directionally correct. He's like, so get rid of the 15. Just because the field is there doesn't mean you have to use it.
Oh, amen.
And I was like, and I laugh when I think about that, Chris, because when you go into some of these initiatives, it's not the first thing that you're thinking of. You're thinking like, wow, this is great. Look at all the information that I'm going to get. But then you don't do anything with it either, because it's not relevant to your business. It doesn't move the needle. It's not going to create a tipping point, just to quote Malcolm Gladwell. But it was like, and so like every time that I'm looking at our CRM, I remind myself, just because the field is there does not mean we need to use it.
No, exactly. And that's what I'm constantly telling people: strip away, strip away, strip away, get to the bare bones, because there's a cost to every data field you have on there. People don't realize that, but there is a cost, and there's an impact. We had a client when we first engaged with them, they had over 300 fields on their opportunity. Crazy. Absolutely nuts. And when we analyzed how those were being utilized, there were like 5 or 6 that were actually consistently being populated. But because nobody knew what the heck to do with all these other ones, because if someone had this great idea, well, let's add this field, someone else, let's add this field. And then they move on to a different role, or that problem goes away. We don't need that. No one ever takes that stuff away.
Never.
And it's insane. And keep it simple, keep it streamlined. Make sure it serves a purpose. Otherwise, get rid of it. If you need the little information thing that just tells you what needs to go into the field, that you probably don't need it. Exactly. And so no, it's crazy. We've gotten way past our time. I've really enjoyed talking to you. So
have I, Chris. Thank you so much.
Turn off hit the off switch. I really appreciate you coming on, Karen. If people want to reach out and connect with you, if they want to learn more about your business, what's the best way for them to do that?
LinkedIn's the best way. That's, I'm a big believer in building my network. And so I'm on there. And that's probably the best way to connect with me.
Awesome. So we will have her LinkedIn profile in our show notes, as well as access to links to C&D's website. So be sure to check that out at impellercrm.com/sales lead dog, where you'll get not only this episode, but all our 100+ episodes of Sales Lead Dog. So be sure to check that out, subscribe so you get all our future episodes. Karen, thank you so much for coming on, and welcome to the Sales Lead Dog Pack.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. So much fun. I appreciate you having me.
As we end this discussion on Sales Lead Dog, be sure to subscribe to catch all our episodes. On social media, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Watch the videos on YouTube, and you can also find our episodes on our website at impellercrm.com/Sales Lead Dog. Sales Lead Dog is supported by Impeller CRM, delivering objectively better CRM for business, guaranteed.